I want to welcome you to our third organic workshop of the year, and we're very happy to be at Delvin Farms for this workshop on strawberry production. And I want to thank the Delvins for having us, and Hank and Cindy are the patriarch and matriarch of the farm, and then their son Hank has come back to the farm in recent years, and I'm going to turn it over to him, and he's going to give you a little background on what they're doing here, and then Dave Blackwood's going to take over from there. So,
all right, well, it's been great. Thanks for coming out. A great day to be farming. I know everyone's trying to do some work at home, but strawberries are a very important part of our spring production because it gives us a nice cash flow in the beginning of the year, and it really helps pull customers into the farmers markets, and it's a really important part of our CSA program. At this time of year, our CSA program starts in May, and so we start to get the strawberries into the box about the third week of May. Our CSA program is about 700 members in our program. We got about 14 drop-offs around the national area, and then we do 5 farmers markets throughout the season. We started picking berries this year, last week, in our outside production, and then in a little while we're going to go to the other side of the road, and we have a tunnel over there, an acre of hay-grow tunnels, and we started picking that about a month ago. The field production versus the tunnel production, the tunnel production really gives you a nice consistent product, and it kind of takes up a lot of the variables out of growing strawberries. I would say that this year our field berries are looking really good compared to some other years, and so I think we're going to have a really good year with strawberries. As far as our sales on the strawberries, like I said, it's a really good cash flow this beginning part of the season. It really helps pull those customers in the market. I mean, we sold 400 quarts on Saturday at the market.
425 quarts before 10
Yeah.
a.m.
We do and if you're doing farmers markets and you're not doing the social media, you need to really think about that, because what we do is we put it on the Facebook and hey, we're going to be at the market with the strawberries, and we have a lot of followers on Facebook, and so then they come to the market just to pick up the berries. And we also do a lot of wholesale work with the berries at this time of year. We're selling to Whole Foods, a lot of restaurants, the 2 turnip trucks in the Nashville area, and we sell them in one quart clamshells with a sticker on top.
Also restaurants.
Yeah, I said the restaurants. And of course, everything we grow is certified organic on the farm with the strawberries. The varieties we grow are typically Chandlers. That's my favorite. I've tried some Camarosas. I got 2 rows of Camarosas here at the end. And then on the other side, in a tunnel, which may not be a good comparison, but because we started picking those berries in January, believe it or not, second week of January. Those were Camarosas. But for me, I really like the Chandler. The Chandler gives you a really big berry. It's a great flavor. And so having that big berry, that's what the customers are looking for, and it saves on your labor because it fills up those containers pretty quickly. The June bearing varieties we would typically plant out in September. The earlier the better. You want to get a nice crown going before the winter comes on, and we cover our berries all winter too, mainly because of the deer. We got so many deer in this area. Herds of 10 to 15 every night roll through the fields, so we cover them, keep the deer off, and what that does is it protects your crowns, keeps them a little bit warmer, and it did force these things to bloom a little bit earlier. So looking at some of my fellow farmers at the markets, no one has berries yet, but we started picking, like I said, last week, and I think it's because I covered my berries all winter. These started blooming. I just covered them with the floating row cover. The Yagbon
Stayed on all.
Yeah, stayed on all winter. We pulled them off one time in February because I wanted to freeze off the blooms because they started blooming in January actually. I froze those blooms off, and then we put them back on. And covering them, I think, gave us. Of course, we've had a really mild winter, this year, but it gave us 2 weeks, I think, of that.
Do you
So that's
stuff that comes in a tunnel.
at the same time. I planted the tunnels and the exterior berries at the same time. We get all of our berries in a potted. We get a 50 cell transplant, so it's a pretty big plug. We don't do any bare root. We do all plug plants. Get it from Connell. It's out of North Carolina. They're certified organic plugs, and well, like I said, the key is getting them in early. You know, if you get them in, for us, if we get them in October, they just don't put on a nice crown, and so you want to have a nice thick crown going into the winter. Otherwise, it seems to me that they make all vine and not a lot of blooms. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. We'll talk as we go along now. If there are any questions or comments, please stop and we'll address those as we go along. There is a handout up on the table on organic strawberry production, and you might want to help yourself to one of those sometime during the afternoon. Start off with, actually, as has been indicated, strawberries have been an important crop in Tennessee for years. Back in the 50s, actually, Tennessee was #1 strawberry growing state in the nation with upwards of 15,000 acres or so berries, and we dropped down a good bit in the 70s, and now we're seeing an increase. One of the problems we ran into early on was a disease called anthracnose, which is still a major concern for us in strawberry production, but because of the heavy loss of plants that we were having in the matted row system, which we'll discuss in a bit, but it's a longer range system, we were finding that if we were going to stay in the plant strawberry business, we were going to have to look at another way to go. And the plasticulture, or the annual system, is kind of the one that we gravitated toward. Conventional strawberry production and organic strawberry production are really not that different. The challenges, the procedures that we go through in producing the crop one way or the other are very similar, but in organic production of strawberries, as in most crops, you really need to be a little bit more on top of things to maximize your performance, because you don't have perhaps as many other aids at your disposal, primarily from an insecticide or fertilizer standpoint. And it takes a little bit more pre-planting, site preparation, and site maintenance to be successful. But again, for the most part, the concepts that we use in organics and the concepts that we use in conventional are very similar. Now, we're in an area where you can actually grow strawberries 2 or 3 different ways. The way we always grew them in the past was a matted row system, which is a multi-year system. We would plant in the spring of the year. That first season we devoted to primarily increasing the plant population in the field. So we'd set out our plants somewhere, depending on variety, 18 to 24 inches apart in the rows 4 or 5 feet apart, depending on equipment. And then that first summer we'd pull blooms off the berries and try to get the plant to run and set as many runners as possible, so that as we went into the fall, we had a fairly solid row of strawberry plants for production the next spring. And then we'd harvest in the spring of the year, and then renovation was the next big challenge that we'd have, where we'd go in and remove a bunch of the original plants, and by doing that we were able to encourage the mother plants to start to run again and set more runner plants where the best yields, the best fruit quality would come in following years. And depending on our competence at renovation, the ability to irrigate, and also Mother Nature's cooperation, we may be able to harvest the field several times. Now, with organic production, we don't get as many harvests out of a given field in matted row culture as we did in conventional. And primarily because of our lack of good weed control. Weeds are probably the single biggest challenge in growing strawberries. Yeah, we have a lot of insect disease issues to contend with, but weeds are the one that can cost you the most. And so we spend a lot of time in advance of planting trying to get the weed population under control, and then we'll maintain the planting as long as we can economically control weeds, which may be just one harvest or at the most two, before we find that weed pressure develops to the point that we actually need to get rid of that planting and have something else coming in. Whereas in conventional planting, we have had growers that'll go 4, 5, 6 or more harvests out of the same field. So that's kind of the matted row culture thing. Again, we plant in the spring. We don't let the plants bloom that first year. We pull the blooms. We want runner production. The second spring or early summer we fruit, and then renovate and for another harvest, or remove the planting at that time. And again, weed pressure is going to be one of the determinants. The plasticulture system, also referred to as an annual system or annual strawberry production system, as Hank Jr. pointed out, will plant in late summer, fall, depending on where in Tennessee you're located. It may be mid to latter part of September on up into October. And we'll plant on a raised bed that's covered with plastic, and then we'll fruit them in the spring. And we really don't want runner production at all. We just want a high crown population and high density of plants, fruit them in the spring, and then remove the planting at that time. We're using a different variety than we did in the matted row system. Right now, Early Glow in the matted row system is probably the most popular variety, followed by another little bit later harvesting variety, and an All-Star in Tennessee seems to be the one that most people go for. In the plasticulture system, Chandler is by far the dominant variety that we're looking at right now. We do have a couple other varieties, Sweet Charlie and Camarosa, that are also being planted, but to a much less extent or smaller acreage than what the Chandlers are. Chandlers are high yielders, big berries, and if they're allowed to ripen well under good weather conditions, they get to be excellent quality, and these definitely this year are. And I agree with what you said earlier about this looking like a good year for berries. But again, with plasticulture, we plant in late summer or fall on a raised bed covered with plastic, pick in the spring, late spring, early summer, and destroy the planting. And then another facet you'll see in organic strawberry production that's different than conventional is the rotation. Rotations are an important part of any strawberry operation, especially in organics, because of the weed problems, we want to grow the plant or grow the crop and then rotate out of that field, and sometimes the rotations may be as much as a 3, 4, or 5 year rotation before we get back into that field. Part of that is done for weed control. It'll allow us to grow cover crops or other crops that would make controlling certain types of weeds a lot easier. Also, disease control is going to be another issue. And so rotation, again, is going to be an important part. And as an organic grower, if you're growing the matted row system, that first summer, after that first harvest, you've got to make a decision. Do you renovate or do you rotate? And renovation, if you've got good weed control, may be an option. However, if your weed control programs break it down, then probably rotation to another field is going to be your best option. And we talk a little bit about rotation in this handout, primarily as to what you might want to use following a strawberry crop to help control weeds and maybe to help build the soil back and also to lessen certain pest problems, nematodes or certain soil insects or certain soil diseases. With strawberry production in general, we want to be careful about where we plant. There are some diseases such as verticillium wilt that will overwinter in the field and can cause serious losses in the crop in many years. And so we want to avoid following a crop such as tomatoes or potatoes or eggplant, or if we have certain types of weeds, for example lamb's quarters, that can be a carrier for verticillium, we may need to avoid those areas, or at least take into account the presence of that crop and extend our rotation. Verticillium, if the soil becomes infested with verticillium, you can see that persist in the soil upwards of 12 to 13 years. So it's a problem that can be a long-lasting thing. And so the rotation is going to be a key component of strawberry production, especially for the organic grower. We don't fumigate, we don't have the herbicides that we're using in conventional, so rotation is going to play that part.
Can you till the strawberries back in if they haven't shown any disease?
Yeah, you can incorporate them. Yeah. Now, another thing that makes organic production of strawberries perhaps a little bit different from conventional is fertilization. Nitrogen is a key component of strawberry production. They're a fairly heavy user of nitrogen. With organic production, for the most part, we're looking at using our cover crops and plowing down cover crops or compost. And with these products, or with these materials, we're getting a lot more extended breakdown and release of nitrogen. And so you have to anticipate your needs, and you can't react as quickly as you could if you were using an inorganic nitrogen form. And it may be, in some cases, necessary to supplement the cover crops or the compost through foliar application or through fertigation of another nitrogen source. And that's not something we like to do because we don't have a lot of options, and they're not always that easy to use. But so we anticipate our needs well in advance if we're going to be in organic production, and start building the soil with the idea that we are going to be growing strawberries in a year or two. And usually when we talk about fruit production, we talk about site preparation a year or more in advance. Well, definitely if you're growing organic strawberries, you want to look on down the road beyond that 1 year. Now, site selection too is something else we need to be talking about in strawberry production in general, because we do have an early blooming crop, as already has been mentioned. So frost is always an issue. We would like to be able to select a site that's going to give us less potential for frost injury. Elevation as compared to the immediate surroundings is going to be beneficial, because a frost situation, a radiation frost event, we'll see frost settling in low areas before it will in the higher regions. And so if we can plant in an elevated site, we may get by that marginal frost. If we also get a little bit of disease control, because again, if we have a fog or dew, the wet areas, the lower areas, are where we'll have our greatest disease pressure. So we want to, as organic growers, use everything that we can to help to ensure the success. As we look at a site, okay, elevation is good. A slight slope does give you better air drainage. Exposure, you know, if we had a south-facing slope, that ground is going to heat a little bit quicker in the spring. You're going to see a little bit earlier activity than you would if you were on, say, a northern-facing slope. Frost is a little bit more of a threat on that south-facing slope because of that earliness of the plant. But you also have the potential of getting on the market a little bit ahead. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons. South-facing slopes tend to be a little bit more droughty. So if you're planting in the soil and flat, not on a raised bed and without trickle irrigation, be aware that you could run into some water issues more quickly on that south-facing slope than the north. South-facing slope is going to have lower organic matter soil content as a rule. And again, that's going to have an impact on growth. So we look at site selection from an elevation, the direction of slope. We're going to look at soils. On strawberries, we want to have a minimum of 12 inches or more of rooting depth because you want to have the roots be able to go down and out as much as they can. The more area the roots can explore, the less issues you're going to have with fertility problems or water problems. So you want to have an extensive root system if possible. Strawberries will go on a wide variety of soils, but they grow best on loamy soils that have a decent organic matter content. If you get a clay soil, you may have some issues with poor drainage, and then you can see some diseases that show up a little bit worse, such as red steel. You also, if you're on a sandy soil, of course, are more potential or have more potential for drought issues. One of the things we want to do as we plant strawberries is look at what's out there as far as disease-resistant varieties and use that as much as you can. And there's a chart taken actually out of the Pennsylvania Management Guide that lists some of the matted row varieties, some of the day-neutral varieties, as well as some of the plasticulture varieties as far as resistance to certain diseases, like red steel, which is a root disease that can be devastating, and there are resistant varieties. We also have some ratings on powdery mildew resistance. That can be an issue. Last year was a severe powdery mildew year. And so if you can find varieties that do have resistance to diseases, look at them real closely. If they fit your market, the time of ripening, the type of fruit you want to grow, then you ought to give serious consideration to those and avoid some of those that have no resistance or may be highly susceptible to certain problems. Because matted row berries are in the field over a longer period of time than our plasticulture berries, some diseases such as anthracnose are actually more of a threat because we'll lose plants in the summer months with anthracnose, but we'll also lose plants some in the fall and early in spring. So we do want to look at variety characteristics as well as the site characteristics. Any questions so far?
You said like powdery mildew was a big problem last year.
Right.
Do you find that if you get it one year, that it's going to be maybe several years before powdery mildew gets to be a problem again? Is that the rhythms of nature?
No, the question was on powdery mildew. If it was bad this past year, what's the chances of it being a problem again this coming year? And in many cases, first off, it's going to depend on when it became a problem last year and the way you're growing your crop. Because if it did show up late in the season last year, the potential for it being a problem early this year is high because of where the disease overwinters. But now powdery mildew is also, as are most diseases, tied into weather conditions. But unlike a lot of diseases, powdery mildew shows up under hotter, drier situations, whereas many of the other diseases are more serious where we have cooler, moisture conditions. Okay? If you look a little bit on plasticulture and read on some of the literature on plasticulture, one of the questions that is very apt to come up is, in regards to organics, is plasticulture actually sustainable? And of course, one of the main concepts of organic production is sustainability. And the question of that has kind of been, well, the point it's at right now is that if you grow on plastic and after you terminate the crop, if the plastic is removed from the field, then it does qualify as an approved organic practice. And from a weed control standpoint, it's very, very important. Now there's some work being done to look at other types of mulches and so on in regards to an annual system. But right now, the use of plastic is probably the dominant way that we're going to go about our weed control program. So any other questions?
You're referring to the sustainability of the fact that it's a petroleum product.
The
and
disposal of the
yeah,
plastic, yeah.
Disposal is an issue because most recyclables won't take it because recycling companies because it's dirty. They can't deal with the dirt and everything and the trash in it. And so it basically has to go to a landfill.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
But because of its importance in weed control, it is an accepted and approved organic practice at this time.
And we actually have some of those biodegradable options that you see in the
One thing too that we can see here is the mulch between the rows. And well, with the plasticulture, we're using a raised bed. And a raised bed generally will have a bed that may be around 30 inches wide with double row on top. The bed may be 6 to 8 inches in height or more. And then in the area between the rows, we'll address that either with a cover crop or, as you can see here, with a clean straw mulch. And the mulching is very important because we use it as a way to suppress weeds. We also use it as a way to prevent soil splash up on the fruit. And some of our disease control will be vastly improved if we can keep the soil from splashing up on fruits. So a combination of the mulch between rows not only gives you a better place to work and helps keep the weeds down, but it also helps in the disease control program. Now, as far as fungicides on disease control of strawberries, we don't have a lot. And you know, we look a lot at sulfur or coppers as a primary material, but there's some concern about the use of these materials as far as potential plant damage, and also they're not highly effective on many of the diseases that we have to combat. And so again, we're falling back onto good site selection, good site preparation, and good planning design to give us as much natural protection against these disease issues as we can get.
What about Serenade?
Well, again, I'm not really familiar with the label on it, but on a lot of these things, we're looking at things that while they may be effective, are not going to have a long life, and so you may be looking at multiple applications where they are labeled for use on the crop.
It's a bacteria.
I do use Serenade. I've sprayed these twice in the last 2 weeks. The key to the Serenade is it doesn't last very long because of the UV, but you also have to have really good coverage, so you need a good air blast sprayer or some way to kind of shoot that material, turn it into a fine mist and shoot it through there. And so, you know, for me, it's a very hard thing to measure too. I mean, it's you know, is it working? I don't have much disease. Okay, is it because I've created Serenade? Or if I do have disease, I mean, I'm still using the Serenade. It's a really hard thing to measure if it's working or not.
Have you used it on tomatoes to see if it does anything for that?
No, I haven't used it on tomatoes. I use basically the copper on the tomatoes, but I do use the Serenade. I tried. So
I'm trying to find a source for it.
Deerfield has the Serenade now. Deerfield Supply Company up in Kentucky. They sell it in a 2.5 gallon jug. It's $98. So.
Okay. Irrigation is going to be a vital component in strawberry production regardless of how you're growing them. And with the plasticulture system, because we do have a raised bed, because we are covering it with plastic, we don't need, well, you don't benefit very much from natural rainfall because a lot of it's going to run off. So the inclusion of a trickle line underneath the plastic to provide needed moisture is going to be essential. And also, because you've got a crop that with the raised beds, with the black plastic, may start to become active earlier than normal, frost control can be a greater problem in plasticulture than it can in the matted row system. And so you look at supplemental frost control techniques, and there are several. Mulching, row covers, overhead irrigation, icing them down, or a combination of overhead and row covers can be utilized. If you're going to look at irrigation, especially if you're going to look at frost protection, you want to look at quality of water and quantity of water, and when do you need it, and assess that. Because if you get into irrigation for frost protection, we're putting on a lot of water, and systems quite often will run at 1/1500 of an inch to 2/10 of an inch an hour, and that's a lot of water. We'll run for in many cases several hours at a time, and maybe even consecutive nights in a cold snap. So you don't want to get midway in to icing up your planting and run out of water, because then you've created more of a problem than if you'd never started. So you have to have a lot of water. Later on, when you're looking at drought control, where are you getting your water? If you're coming out of a stream, is it good quality water? Also, how much is there? You don't want the creek to dry up about the time you need to be pumping. And quality of water brings up another point. Ideally, we'd be using potable water when we irrigate at bloom and as we approach harvest. But irrigation is a vital component. And keep in mind that whatever you can do to keep the plant healthy, from a fertility standpoint, from a water standpoint, as well as the site, is going to help you on your pest control program too. So it's kind of an all or nothing type of thing for the successful producer.
A question on timing of when you prep your field, or how you start prepping your field. Exactly.
It's a frantic pace at the end of August when everything else is going on. It's usually hard as a rock because it hasn't rained, but we really shoot for that September planting. So I'll start prepping those fields in mid-August to late August, and then lay up my plastic. And of course, with the plasticulture, you really have to have a good loose soil bed. I mean, a cloddy soil, you're going to pay for it. Last fall, when we were putting these in, I had the plants in early September, and it started raining, and it rained every week, it seemed like, for 3 or 4 weeks. And so I had very narrow windows to go in there, and it was really wet. It was heavy. And so my beds, actually, you'll see some skips out there, and that's really where the tractor was almost sliding sideways as I'm going down there because it was so wet. But I forced them in there. It's one of those things, you're fighting it the whole time, though. That was not the ideal conditions, but because with the plasticulture, like I said, you really need that loose soil bed. So,
What was in here immediately before the berry?
that's a good question.
A cover
I
crop
had.
or-
Well, that's right. We had kale in here. I had berries and cabbage. I had berries here 3 years ago.
Okay.
We had a cover crop like this veg and wheat rye before that.
Yeah.
Okay. So one cover crop in 3 years.
No, we pretty much do a cover. Well, every 2 years. I mean,
Okay.
I don't have a cover crop when I got berries, but we put cover crops on everything else every year.
Okay.
And see, that's the other thing is I'm planting 60 to 70 acres of cover crops about the same time I'm trying to put my berries in, so and keep up with markets and CSA. So it's a really busy time for us that time of year because of the cover cropping. So.
You have to water all winter long?
Nope. In fact, I watered a couple of times when we put them out, and then I never watered over the winter. So it holds the water, and you do get some. Well, it wicks up from the sides, and then it does go through the holes a little bit.
And really, too, as you get down into the colder months, the uptake of water by the plant is going to be vastly reduced. Do you want to move over, or are there any more questions here?
On your mulch, you mow it before you work it up?
You mean a cover crop?
Yeah.
I try not to. I try to, as best I can, I try to plow as deep as I can to just flip it.
You started over.
I turn it, yeah. Yeah, you know, when we do mow, you want to get in there and turn that as quickly as possible because you don't want really that green moss to turn into dry straw because then you've lost all your benefit of turning and growing it. Yeah, so anyway. All right, I guess we'll get started. I love my tunnels. For those of you who don't know, it's my favorite part of the strawberry production because when it's raining outside, I'm inside picking. I don't care. Bring it on. And so it's really nice. The tunnels give you a lot better fruit quality. Your plants are going to be bigger. I mean, you can just tell that these are the same variety and they were planted at the same time. It's just that my tunnel berries are bigger. We are going to get more than a quart per plant. I'm hoping about 1.5 quarts per plant this year. And the quality of the fruits is so much better because you don't have all those environmental bacteria and funguses floating around. Most of the funguses, it's protected from all the moisture. Very dry conditions in the tunnels. It keeps all the moisture off the leaves. Of course, you know, just like the outside berries, I do have the drip irrigation going on. The biggest problem, pest-wise, in my tunnels are the spider mites. Because it's a much drier condition, I never had this problem outside, but inside the spider mites just flourished. They took off. Before I knew what it was, because it looked like a disease or nutrient problem, we had such an infestation last year that it kind of suppressed my berries for about 3 weeks. And after I got it under control, they came right back. One of the, organically, you can spray some mineral oil or something like that, but we use a spider mite predator. It comes in a jar. I drop 4 to 6 of these jars every other week into the tunnels. Now these spider mite predators will eat between 10 and 12 spider mites a day, and then they do multiply. And they don't fly, they don't move around very much, but they do crawl. So once the plants start touching like they are now, they will move through the whole canopy of plants. So, these are about $17 a bottle for those things. This is called a Haygrove tunnel. That's the manufacturer of these tunnels. The unique thing about these tunnels is, well, there's several manufacturers that do this, but it's the cheapest way to get the most acreage under tunnel. This is a full acre. They're 300 feet long and 24 feet wide, and there's 6 bays. You'll notice that it does have the bows, but what's missing compared to a regular greenhouse are the purlings. That's your vertical struts that go all the way down in the middle and the 2 sides. Instead, this thing is really held on by the guide wires, the high tensile wires. There's one on the post, and there's one across the top. The plastic is not held on in any way. In fact, you take the plastic off during the wintertime. The plastic just kind of, you can just picture it just laying on top of the bows, and then you take the orange ropes and you just cinch the ropes down and it keeps it held tight. This is in the vented stage right now. I've got my plastic rolled up and it's vented a little bit. The thing about the Haygroves versus a greenhouse as well is that it is not an airtight, it's not as tight as a greenhouse. So you're going to have gaps where the 2 pieces of plastic come together. My indoors, which are not here, they have some gaps in them, and on the bottom it's not seamed to the ground in any way too. So, but it does give you probably 10 degrees of protection. That and your floating row cover, another 2 to 3 degrees, you get some pretty good protection through the winter. This particular plastic too, they call it a luminescent plastic. It has a resin in the plastic that diffuses the sunlight. It's supposed to help increase your photosynthesis because it does that diffusion. And so instead of direct light coming onto your plants, it's coming at all different angles. Very much so like when it hits the ground, it bounces back, but it's diffused everywhere. The plants are protected from a lot of the wind, so They're not getting a lot of the beating that they get out in the field from the wind. Of course, my disease pressure is lower because, like I said, it has less moisture. So you have a little bit less ventilation, but you don't have that much disease because there's no moisture. These tunnels are from England, and they were actually designed or built from Haygrove, and they're berry producers, so they designed these for strawberry production. I've got the same size bed as my outside production. I've got 4 rows. You'll notice they're a lot tighter. We used it's a new bedder from Rainflow. It's a mini bedder. It's a very small, compacted bedder. You got to use a smaller tractor, and it gives you a 59-inch center-to-center bed, and it's really the only way I could get 4 rows into this bay. The material between the rows is a 15-year weed block material. We are able to roll that up and reuse it every year. I'm hoping I can get about 10 years out of it. It really depends on how you pull up the stakes and how well you take care of it. And of course, then the plastic, of course, is thrown away every year, and you don't reuse any of that part of that. The hoop house production, this year it wasn't that significant, but in previous years it gives us about a month earlier production too. We're picking consistently the first week of April in here, but this year we started picking the last week of March, whereas our field berries don't normally come in till the 1st of May. What else can I say about the hoop house production?
When do
It's
you
just
close
nice.
them up?
Hmm?
When do you close your hoop houses up?
I put the plastic on in mid-January this year. I try to do it at Christmas. We got too busy this year. The other thing about this type of system on a tunnel, it's not for everybody because it's a lot of work. You gotta have a staff on hand almost all the time, 24/7, because if you've got thunderstorms moving through, and it happened to us twice this year, these tunnels are not designed to withstand more than 45 to 50-mile-an-hour winds with the plastic in place. So if you have a storm coming in, you have to roll these things up and vent them about to a 2/3 mark and really push all this plastic up. So you've got to have a crew on hand come out here and do that. And you got to have somebody dedicated to watching the weather and making sure that, these things don't surprise you as well. Because the worst thing is, and there's plenty of pictures on the internet about collapsed tunnels. The wind catches these things and just turns them into pretzels. So they are a lot of work in that sense. And they don't recommend them for winter production because of that, but many growers like myself are pushing the envelope with that and doing winter production. I really don't know what would happen if I got into a nice, nasty, ice, windy winter storm in the middle of February with blooms on the plants, and I got to take the plastic off. I mean, that would be kind of a disaster, but it would have to be done. So, because you can't risk losing the tunnels. We added this tunnel 3 years ago, and you guys want to take the time, I also added another tunnel over here that we planted our tomatoes in. That's our 2nd acre of tunnels over there. And
And so you'll swap these back and forth, tomatoes.
That's the
and
idea.
berries
Mhm.
back and forth.
And how many years do you expect to get out of this plastic?
5 years out of the plastic. Yep. Growers, I mean, if you take care of it, you can actually get 6 to 7 is what I'm hearing. I'm not as good, I don't think, at taking care of it because when you store it, when you take off the plastic in the winter, it just slides into these troughs. And what you need to do is you go in there and you cover the plastic in the troughs with another piece of plastic and wrap it tight with rope so you don't get the water coming in and building up big bubbles, because the bubbles will stretch the plastic and rip the plastic and tear the plastic. So it's important to, once you have it into the stored position, to protect it as well. So, and the plastic will tear. I mean, like I said, this does not have it's not as tight as a greenhouse because there's lots of holes in this plastic. But it's pretty durable stuff. It doesn't tear. It doesn't rip or tear. It's really hard to tear, and so it stays together.
talk about some of your work with it?
Sure. So we have some tunnels in Knoxville that we're growing some strawberries in, and we've been growing them. This is our 3rd year, and we're looking at different varieties in our tunnel. And Barclay Poling from North Carolina State has done a lot of work with high tunnel berries. And like Hank has said, we try to get them in that first week in September if at all possible, because then out of our tunnels, which do have the ends on and are 4-season tunnels instead of the Haygrove type that you need to take the plastic off of. And we started harvesting our berries in the end of November, early December this year. So with our system, we're getting that additional crop in the winter when we don't have berries from other folks. So we're getting those premium prices on them. And some of the varieties that we're looking at are a little different, and they've been bred out of the University of Florida. And the 2 that have done the best for us so far are called Strawberry Festival and Radiance. And what we're finding is we have collaborators in Texas and Washington. Our Texas collaborator took a great photo of one of his in the winter. He put it on his blackberry. It was called Strawberry versus Blackberry, and it really took up almost his whole blackberry. So we're getting really good size on them. We're getting that good quality because they're not getting the overhead rain, and we have good firmness on them and really, really high sugar levels on them. Other things about those, our biggest problem in our tunnels is the lygus bug. And a lygus bug is a bug that's going to come in and it's just going to eat the seeds off the side of your berry. It doesn't really touch the fruit, but once it eats that seed off, it really makes the berry unmarketable. And for organic production, it's really difficult to control unless you're using something that's broad spectrum like Pyganic, which we haven't wanted to use in our tunnels because we've spent the last 3 years trying to build up our beneficial insects, and we now have a really good population of beneficials in our tunnels. As Hank mentioned, he releases beneficials, and we've built up our population so that we no longer need to buy them. They're just naturally there, so we're trying to maintain those. So the lygus bug has proven to be very problematic for us. We've tried some tanglefoot on our beds, and that turned into a nightmare because the berries started sticking to the tanglefoot too. So that's something we're still battling with. But we did find the source of our lygus bugs. One of our fellow researchers planted a field of alfalfa, and that's the preferred host of the lygus bug. So it went right from the alfalfa into our strawberries. So we determined where it came from. So that's something to think about if you're a strawberry producer, and when you're thinking about cover crops, alfalfa would be one to avoid. So that's something we've learned over our 3 years.
And clover and tomatoes don't go good either.
Clover and tomatoes don't go good either.
Get that little old bitty bug that spreads that spotted tomato blight.
Oh, the thrips?
Thrips.
Thrips, yep.
Because I done had that issue at wiping the tomatoes out, or Mountaineer did one year because of the thrips and clover I had next to it.
So cover crops can be very important, but you want to know what you might be hosting when you're getting cover crops in there too. And alfalfa is a bad one when the strawberries are around. We'll be talking more about our high tunnel production when we have our field tour at the end of April as well. So you can see our high tunnel system there and compare it to what the Delvins are doing here. But the Haygroves are a great way to go to cover lots of acreage. Yes?
Could you recommend a cover crop? Alfalfa is bad, is there one that is good for strawberries?
Well, we usually use either oats and vetch or wheat and vetch. That's what we usually use in the winter for our cover crops. But yeah, this just happened that he planted alfalfa in the field right next to our high tunnels, and we didn't know it until we had a bunch of lygus bugs in there. So
Alfalfa don't do good in this area anyway.
we learn by doing sometimes.
When did you start thinking of what you do?
When did we start? Oh, we planted them in September as well. Ideally, we would like to get them in that first week of September, but much like Hank, we often have a lot going on and the weather doesn't often cooperate. But I think that first week of September will give you your optimum harvest for a winter crop. And ideally, you would have them in time for Thanksgiving and then keep harvesting up right up till Christmas. And then in a normal year, it would get pretty cold in January and February, and we would use a double layer of row cover even inside the tunnels just to let them rest and recoup. And then when it starts to warm up again, we take that row cover off. This year, you know, we never got down that cold, and what we're seeing from that is we have a lot of crown production. So at this point it'll be interesting to see what happens because we do have a lot of crowns that are being produced since it's been so warm. So
Well, that's good, right?
well,
Up to a point.
up to a point. We have a
Okay.
lot of crowns.
Okay.
So it could compromise our fruit size, and we're seeing some of that in the spring.
So you got 2 crops off of them, or you're
Well.
anticipating 2 crops off of the one planting of.
In a normal year, you would get 2 crops. Ours has been kind of a almost not quite continuous cropping
Okay,
since
but November.
late November,
and then-
December.
And then again, a spring crop.
Yeah, in a normal year, you would let them rest January, February, take the row covers off again, end of February into March, and then they're going to start flowering again. You start getting your next crop off right around Easter, and then keep going until June.
Okay, and then you pull those berries out.
And then we pull those out.
I did plant that first tunnel where you park your cars. That is actually not a high tunnel. It's some greenhouses I bought used, and I put them together, and I'm growing it and using it like a high tunnel. But it is a much tighter tunnel compared to the hay groves too. And so we planted some sweet Charlie berries in there, and the same thing. I mean, we started getting winter production. I was picking berries first week of January in the tunnels. I did, so when they started blooming in December, you know, the tunnel does give you about 10 degrees protection, and I did use an additional row cover in there as well. But the issue for us became pollination. Is I got really poor pollination on some of those first berries because they were covered when they were blooming. And so you either have a choice of going out there and uncovering them every day, because the tunnel does get warm during the day, and the bumblebees will start flying, and of course you're having to purchase bumblebees as well. So you got problems with your pollination, and then also the marketing. I mean, you know, you got to have a market for these berries. If you're picking 10, 15 flats of berries in the middle of January, where are you going to sell them? So, you know, we do a winter market, but I saw that as potentially a problem for some growers, depending on where you are. So that's the other issue. So.
And that's a great point. We did have a hive of bees in every tunnel, and they recommend that you replace those hives every 4 weeks. We tried to squeak a little more time out of our hives because they are expensive. They're about $75 a box for a hive of bees, so that's not an insignificant amount of money to spend. And the marketing issue, I think more and more folks are getting creative in that regard, and more folks do the email subscriptions and things like that, so they can send out an email and say, hey, we have strawberries for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and I think that could be a potential issue, but I think folks are real happy to get strawberries at that time, especially when they're local. So, yes.
Do you know why they recommend changing your hive out every 4 weeks?
The bumblebees usually will start to die off then.
So bumblebees are best to do these, not just regular honeybees?
Absolutely. The honeybees actually don't navigate well in tunnels, so if you tried putting them in a tunnel, they would try to get out of the tunnel and they wouldn't do pollination for you. And the bumblebees actually do a different type of pollination as well.
They're marketing this particular plastic. I told you it was a luminescent plastic, and I don't know all the tunnel manufacturers well enough to know if other manufacturers have this luminescent plastic, but Haygrove does. And they market this tunnel as bee-friendly plastic because, like Annette said, bees don't fly well in greenhouses and tunnels. I had a hive of honeybees in here because I raised honeybees last year, and they did well. They didn't die off. The honeybees, I was surprised. I was expecting to lose the hive, in other words. But end of the season, they were still doing pretty good. It's a high tunnel versus my other tunnel, which is very low. And the honeybees do go out, and they're all business. They go straight, they go fly up, and they make a beeline right for where they're going. So a lot of the bees were hitting the top of the plastic. Whereas the bumblebees, I kind of think of them as kind of like hippies because they come out and they're just kind of like this. They go wherever, and then they fly around, and they hit one here, and they fly lazily to another plant. And anyway, so they are a much different flyer in a tunnel. They don't go up and hit the plastic. They come out of the box and go straight to the ground.
They do. We found that they go right down the road though, and
Yeah.
we've watched them. So.
Yeah. The place I buy the bumblebees, they come in 3 sizes, and for some reason the bumblebees all come out of Canada too. But they have a class A, B, and C, and that is a a 3-week, a 5-week, and like a 12-week package is what they say. So, and I think that has to do with how many bees you start out with.
And that's a regular bumblebee.
Yeah, it's a small bumblebee.
Not a
You
boar
can,
bee.
no, it's not a boar. You see a box right over there. They're really easy to handle. I mean, a beekeeper does not need to install the bumblebees because they come in a cardboard box with this little plastic gate on the front. And you can close it down at night, and they're locked in there, and you can open it up during the day, and they can come and go. So they're really easy to move around. One time they got kicked upside down. They didn't like that. And the bumblebees too are a lot better to work around versus the honeybees. I had a big area in front of my honeybee hive that didn't get picked because the honeybees, they don't like people around their hives, especially when it gets really hot. But the bumblebees, you can work right next to the box, and that's no problem. So, and in terms of the numbers, I mean, a typical honeybee hive would have 30 to 40,000 bees, whereas a bumblebee hive is about 200. So.
Do you ever use bumblebees on your other crops, like your other vegetables?
I don't, because I don't like buying all the bumblebees. I know they're better for blueberries than honeybees because the bumblebee will get in there and pollinate the bottom through the bottom, whereas a honeybee will cut the sides of the bloom. So they're better for blueberries. And I understand they're really good for tunnel tomatoes as well. But I see bees flying through this tunnel because the sides are open. I mean, you can see honeybees in here today, I'm sure, that are coming in. So.
Do you see any increase? Is this bumblebee in any form or fashion able to sustain its population in this area? Is it always going to shrunk?
Well, they do. They do. In fact, I asked that question from my supplier. I was like, well, why can't I grow these bumblebees? Why can't I keep them? But in bumblebees, it's kind of like zebras. It's kind of, you can't herd zebras. You can't raise bumblebees like you would honeybees. They do have a queen, but every bee can fly off and become a queen as well. That's different than honeybees, where there's one. She has to have the royal jelly and all that. And the bumblebees tend to make a nest for 4 to 10 weeks, and then they all kind of move on and create new hives. And they're solitary creatures in the winter too. They don't stay in nest or colonies. A bumblebee will fly and hibernate somewhere, and then when she comes out, she starts her new hive, like a wasp, I guess. So they're very much like a wasp.
And bumblebees are actually native, and honeybees aren't. So
yeah, that's true.
They do fine.
So they are though populating.
They are
slowly.
Yeah.
Around here.
It's just they don't stay. When we're doing winter production, like we have our ends on there, and so you wouldn't get a natural
They're not
population.
knocking on the door.
Right. They're not knocking on the door to get in the high tunnel in the winter.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Have you had any experience with mason bees?
The blue mason bee, I've tried to get some blue mason bees out in our orchards, and I might have them out there. I see evidence of what could be blue mason bees, but they're solitary bees. I mean, they don't create any hives at all, so I've actually never seen them, so I don't know. I'm sure they're around though. Yeah.
So have you tried, I don't know if they're working out, but the bee boxes that people make and put in the ground to just create a habitat for
bumblebees?
Would that work too?
I don't know. I haven't tried that.
And my second question was, I didn't think honeybees were native.
Honeybees aren't. Bumblebees are.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions about high tunnel stuff before Dave takes back over?
Any other questions in general for anybody? Points of discussion?
Yeah, the discussion's good.
Okay, I have one.
Okay.
Is it too late to plant your own strawberries now? Or
In a matted row culture?
you just have like a small...
Yeah. Okay. Question is it too late to plant now? And no, it's not. If you're going to grow a matted row, that is, and primarily focus on growing runners this summer for next year. But what you run into, the warmer it is, of course, the drier it is, more critical it is that you eliminate stress on the plant through timely watering and pay real attention to it, because that plant is going to be very vulnerable when you set it out. So yeah, you can still do it, but it's going to take a little bit more intense management than if you'd done it earlier on in the year.
What about an ever-bearing versus a June-bearing? I mean, we always just grow June-bearing. That's just, how do ever-bearing strawberries go in Tennessee?
Well, the only two that I've really heard much about are TriStar and Tribute, and don't hear a whole lot about them, other than what experience I've had. Out of the two, TriStar tends to be, I think, a heavier yielder than Tribute. Tribute has nice sized berries, but I don't honestly know as far as what their yields. You're not going to see an intense yield, and so it might be something that you'd have some production over a lot longer period of time, but if you had a real high demand time in your market, you may not be sufficiently or able to supply it.
Is it because we're too hot in Tennessee? I mean, I have a friend in Massachusetts who grows, he picks berries all through the summer into the fall.
Some of the older ever-bearing varieties,
yes,
we actually used to call them never-bearing because they never bore enough fruit to have much at any one time. But also, when you got in the heat of the summer,
yes,
they pretty much shut down. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, that may not be the situation with the newer varieties, and I honestly can't address that. I don't know. Do you know?
Day neutrals?
The day neutrals like TriStar and Tribute they're most of the June bearing varieties are responsive to day length. They're actually night length, and whereas the day neutral varieties, it's not a day length doesn't enter into the picture.
So you might see that as a synonym for ever-bearing, that day neutral term. And we're actually looking at day neutrals and June bearers in our tunnels, and the June bearers do a lot better for us. We're looking at some of the California varieties. We also have a collaborator in Washington State. So in Washington, it's the same deal as in Massachusetts. The day neutrals do great there, but in Texas and Tennessee, where we get that hot weather, they do fizzle out, and we don't see the yields that we see on the June bearers. We're looking at Albion and San Andreas and Seascape, which are all three California varieties. So those three don't do as well for us as our Chandler and Radiance and Strawberry Festival. But the June bearers definitely do better in this area from what we found.
So almost all commercial production strawberries in Tennessee is a June bearing variety then. I mean, everybody's got a June bearing.
Another thing, Hank mentioned that they're using all plugs here. So when you're going to buy plants, and Dave might talk about this more, you could buy plugs or bare roots, and the plugs are going to cost you double or more.
Yeah.
About 26 to 28 cents a plant.
Yeah. They're going to cost you extra, but your yield is definitely going to make up for it when you're buying a plug.
Yeah, you got again. I think your success as far as getting them in the ground and getting them to take off is going to be a little bit easier than with a bare root plant.
Right.
You've got a very fragile plant with a bare root plant, and you know, a little bit of drying out, a little bit of heat is going to be a real stress on the plant that they may or may not be able to recover from. So that extra money that you might pay for that plug could well be a worthwhile investment.
Absolutely.
Birds eat all of our strawberries and blueberries. Do these help keep the birds off, or is there something else that you do?
That's another good point. I don't have any problems with deer in the tunnels, and I've never had any problems with the birds either. The rabbit's a problem. In fact, I had a tunnel, the whole tunnel of kale, and I was going to do some winter production, and you know how you count your money before you got the crop in, so you know. And I got a groundhog, a rabbit in there, and I couldn't get rid of him. I lost everything. But, you know, and I've seen a rabbit in here, but now I've got so many berries that I don't care. But if you're doing the winter production, I did have a problem with the winter berries too. In January, the rabbit was going down there mowing the plants down because there's nothing else for him to eat. And the rabbit can be a problem. So, but birds are not typically a problem.
That's another good reason to have a closed system tunnel.
Yeah, you got in that tunnel though. They can dig, so somehow.
Yeah, I guess they can.
Are your blueberries under plastic, or?
No, we probably do lose a few to birds, but not that much. Not that many.
Just have mean birds.
I have two questions. Two different, totally different. Have you ever had a problem with mice under the plastic?
Yes, voles specifically.
How do you get rid of them?
It's tough. I've done traps, and it works, but it's a lot of work to get the traps because you got to go out there, check your traps every day. I went to Home Depot and bought the whole store out of traps. I had about 200 traps out there, and they were everywhere. And but some years are worse than others for voles as well. Contrary to organic production too, I mean, having thick cover crops right next to your strawberries is bad for voles. So maybe you should try to have a little bit more buffer around where you don't have high cover crops or weeds or something around your field edges, because then the voles don't migrate into your fields as much that way. And or the predators may help get them too.
You've got two types of voles in this area. The pine vole is primarily an underground worker, and generally we'll see those 2 to 6 inches or more underground. And then you've also got in this area the prairie vole. In upper East Tennessee we've got the meadow vole, but they're surface feeders. Like Hank said, if you've got a mulch cover or a weedy area, they're going to love that because they can feed in there and escape detection from predators. One of the best things you can do is prevention and having a closely mowed strip around, and the wider the strip the better, because they're more exposed to predators and therefore less apt to move into an area. If you've got grown up fence rows, ditch banks, those are excellent places for voles to build. Vole populations tend to be cyclical, generally over a 4 or 5 year period. We appear to be on the high point of our cycle based on the reports I'm getting. And so you may see a lot of voles now. Within a couple years you may not see any. But don't necessarily feel complacent and think that what you're doing is doing the job. It may be a natural cycle depending on food sources and weather conditions. Control is going to be very difficult. For the conventional grower, commercial grower, there are some rodenticides that are labeled for use. There are actually 2 different types. One of them is an anticoagulant material, and the other one is a very intense, it's a zinc phosphide. And they're restricted use products, and rightly so. And they're really kind of a last-ditch control. We try to do whatever we can to lessen habitat and encourage predators. But even with all that, in some cases, vole population is going to build. And so you're going to have to maybe be ready to institute alternate measures. Trapping can work, but the pine vole that works underground, you may see evidence of that just through a little mound of soil with a hole, and that's a breather hole for the tunnel. Now, pine voles usually do not use tunnels that moles build. The raised tunnel is a mole tunnel, not a vole tunnel. So you can excavate around a breather hole and put a snap trap in that area and try not to disturb the tunnel any more than necessary, and bait it with something like peanut butter or something, and you can trap them out. But it's going to be intense, like Hank said. You can also, in some cases, use concentration stations, and that could be a shingle or board placed in the grass in the vicinity of the crop, not on bare ground. And generally we'll do that up in mid-August or so, and then after a couple months we'll lift that board or shingle up. And if you've got an active vole population, a lot of times it'll expose tunnels, and that way you know, A, you've got a vole problem, and B, you've got a place where you can institute your controls. And if you're using a rodenticide, minimize exposure of the rodenticide to non-target species. So, but also realize too that in many cases the voles throughout the bulk of the year are feeding on the fleshy roots of grasses and so on. They're not really an issue in trees or some of the things like blueberries or blackberry, what have you, until you get on up in late fall when normal food sources become limiting. And then they're going to move onto the woody root material, and they'll feed on that throughout the winter months. And then in the spring they'll go back to their preferred sources. So instituting controls around your crop at a time when the voles are really not feeding is not going to do any good at all.
This board just won't put it flat on the ground.
I'm sorry?
The board that you're talking about?
They've used several different types, and you can put it flat on the ground, but if you're going to use trapping, then of course you've got to change some. We've also used sections of PVC pipe, or half sections in some cases, again to provide the protection. And you can bait in that tunnel, and they'll pull in, and you can use a snap trap in there as well. But those are kind of on vole control. That's where we stand right now. Vole damage, incidentally, in tree fruits is probably the #1 cause of tree death in the United States.
Another question, totally different. I read someplace that they were experimenting with the plastic culture, mowing off the tops and letting come back for a second crop. Have you done any experiments with that?
There have been some people that are doing it, and in some cases it's been marginally successful. But in that handout that we had on organic production, in there's several charts on different varieties and disease resistance. And what you'll notice, the plasticulture varieties either are very susceptible to pretty much all the major diseases, red steel, verticillium, powdery mildew, anthracnose, whereas some of the matted row varieties like Early Glow or All-Star show fairly good resistance. So if you were growing a plasticulture system with anthracnose, especially if you're trying to grow in an organic situation, trying to carry over into a second year is probably not going to be very successful because of a disease control standpoint.
I do know a lot of conventional guys who get 2 crops out of a plastic bed too. Some of them even go to year. But in organic production, you're not allowed to do that. You got to pick it up at the end of the year. So.
Well, I'm not organic either.
Yeah.
So that's just strictly an organic production.
Leaving the plastic and trying to reuse it, yeah. Now the other thing, I use the thinner plastic. I use the 1.2 mil, I think. There is a little bit thicker plastic, the 1.6, and actually you'll see through here. I should probably use the 1.6 in my tunnels because the nutgrass comes right through this thinner plastic. It just pokes right through, and I do have a little bit of nutgrass problem here. So the plastic comes in 2 varieties thickness. I would assume the thicker plastic is better for that.
It'll still go through that.
Yeah.
It does go through that.
That's what I thought.
What fumigants are available now a person can use under plastics?
Well, if you have been using methyl bromide and have a record of using it, in some cases it's still available for a little while. If you haven't, you're not going to get it. We're starting trying to screen for other materials, and actually some of the better, more promising materials we're finding now are they're not going to ever get a label.
So they just took one off the market.
Methyl iodide is gone. Yeah, and so right now we just really don't have a lot, and so there's actually been more focus given to growing without fumigation or biofumigants as a way to knock down populations.
What's biofumigants?
It's using something maybe like a brassica that you could incorporate in the breakdown will give some fumigate activity, natural activity in the soil.
There's one in particular that's called Indian mustard, and it's one that has a lot of these compounds that have the biofumigant effect. So you would grow that cover crop up, and then when it's flowering, that's when you would till it under, because that's when it's going to have its most potent biofumigant potential.
Not all that hot heat.
So you would mow it down, and then you would incorporate it right away, and you need to water it in, and those chemicals that are naturally occurring in that crop will go through the soil, and it's good for a lot of soil-borne diseases and nematodes and things. I noticed you had a brassica crop in with your crimson clover.
I did. That was mustard. We plan to put tomatoes there. So, yeah. Right now you can see them because they all have the yellow flowers on. They're all flowered out and everything. So. We get a double crop out of that. We actually cut the mustard and sell them, and at the markets and wholesale. And then what doesn't get cut acts as our fumigant. So.
That's a good idea.
What variety of tomato are you growing?
Those are from Seedways. They're just a red slicer. I actually have some cherries in there too, but it's called Rocky Top and Chargers, the two varieties.
What kind of mulch you use? You make your own or what?
The composting material, we make our own. It's mostly horse bedding because that's just what I have available. The fertility in our tunnels, I was using a lot of rabbit manure because I had a nice rabbit producer here, but he's since closed up shop. So we've switched over to chicken manure. So we do about 2 to 4 tons per acre of the chicken. And I'm finding the chicken manure is really a good, nice option. So.
Feed anything through the drip?
Pardon me?
Feed anything through
on our strawberries and probably on our tomatoes in the tunnel. I also do the fish. We get the Neptune's Harvest out of Gloucester. I buy it in a 55-gallon drum. I generally will put about a drum on every time when I water, and I put that on about every 2 weeks. So I'm not putting it on every time I water, but every 2 weeks I put about a drum, and I'll do that for about 3 times.
Talk about the watering, how you schedule and water.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sophisticated in the sense that I'm not measuring the soil moisture content or anything like that. It's mostly just experience and eyeballing. We watered yesterday, and this time of year, once you get this much foliage and canopy, it really sucks up the water, especially when it's putting on the berries. So you're watering in these, outside and inside every week. So pretty much we just want to maintain a nice, consistent moisture in that bed. You don't want it to go in and out of the cycles of dry, wet, dry, wet. We just try to keep it nice and moist throughout the whole fruiting process. So. I water once a week.
So once a week is enough now?
Right now it is, yeah. Now if it's in May and it gets really hot, first off that's going to knock off your berry production anyway because it shortens your berry production, but it may be a little bit more frequent than that. So, and also it depends on how heavy you're watering. I mean, right now I'm watering for about 12 hours. Sometimes we'll go to about a 20 or 24-hour watering cycle, so because it's just dripping really slow. So.
What size of meters you got on?
That's a good question. I don't know. Queen Gill, Deerfield. I think it's 0.2 gallons per hour or something like that. No, I mean, no, that's pretty high. I don't know.
How long does it take you to break down
the tunnels?
No, I mean when you compost it. When you get it from the horse stables,
how
long do you let it set before you use it?
A long time because we have such a large pile over there. Some of it's been there for about 3 years, honestly.
Do you turn it?
I turn it. I turn it a lot more frequently in the winter than I do the summer, just because of time.
Do you keep it covered to keep the grass
No,
out of it?
I don't. I don't keep it covered, and that is a bit of an issue. So is that
with mine, I've tried to compost some, and the grass is always an issue with me, especially if it's close to commuter grass.
True, and of course horse bedding is, a horse doesn't digest the seeds. In other words, it's a viable seed when it comes out, whereas this cow manure, because they have the 4 stomachs, it's not. So, am I putting? Yeah, I'm planting weeds, but I mean, what are you gonna do?
I didn't know because we have an excess of that.
Yeah.
But I did go to a farm a month or so ago with Lee, and the guy was composting leaves, and he was keeping it covered with plastic. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it probably is because it controls your moisture. You can add the moisture when you want to, that type of thing. I don't do a lot of compost spreading in the fields because we have such a large operation. I just don't have enough compost nor the time to do it. I do heavy composting in my tunnels because it's a very intense environment. But as far as our field production, my organic matter is basically green manures. I'm growing that cover crop up and flipping that under and incorporating that in soil.
How soon do you usually turn your cover crop before you plant?
You want to cut. We usually turn it when it blooms. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but the vetch over there beside the strawberries, it's almost starting to bloom, which is really early. We need to start thinking about turning that soon. Vetch, of course, you really don't want it to go to seed because it's really. Am I correct in saying that when it's blooming, that's when it's fixing the most nitrogen too?
That's right.
So, yeah.
That is peak.
And it's peak, yeah.
So when did you plant that, the cover crops there?
September, that was probably third week of September. We planted cover crops from September through end of November. So, but that one's
The
pretty
later
nice.
you get in November, the
the
worse of a
it
stand
gets.
you're going to get. So
Yeah.
again, you know, it's always a thing. If you're getting a cash crop out of it, you don't want to rip it out and put a cover crop in. But yeah, if you can get it in September, early October, you'll have a better stand on your cover crop than if you're getting it in November.
But when you look at the value of what a cover crop can do for you, it's really to your benefit to consider that cover crop as one of your more desired crops and do whatever it takes to grow it well, because the better it grows, of course, the more benefit you're going to get from it as a cover crop.
That's true. You're going to get the weed protection and the nitrogen and beneficials and all sorts of things. If there's the brassica in there, you'll get that biofumigation effect or disease control effect. So they do have a lot of benefits.
Where's the best, cheapest place to get cover crops?
Seed? If you're not organic, co-op. It's great. If you're organic, certified organic, it's a lot more costly. We buy a lot of stuff from Alfred Ferris because he's local. I can pick it up and I can pay shipping. But like the veg, he's $2.10 a pound on the veg. And, the cereal rind things, he's pretty competitive with.
Alfred who?
Ferris?
F-A-R-R-I-S.
What's the name of this farm? Is it Ferris?
Windy Acres.
Yeah, Windy Acres.
He's up in Robertson County.
What is your cover crop the only nutrient you put on the main fields?
No, I'm doing a lot of that chicken manure as well. And also, we're trying to get away from it, but we used to do, and we still do, Nature Safe fertilizer. It's a pelleted fertilizer from Griffin Industries out of Kentucky. Once again, it is a chicken litter manure type product anyway. They pelletize.
Chicken manure is amazing in that regard. So, if you go, especially with higher levels of chicken litter, you can suppress mycorrhizal growth within the soil and some of the soil bacteria. I know that, so that can be a concern. And then also, of course, we're also concerned somewhat with the salts levels. So it's a good material up to a point.
Especially in a high tunnel situation, you want to think about those salts. When you're taking the plastic off in the winter, that's good because you're getting that rain to leach those salts out. But if you have a tunnel that you're not taking the plastic off, then we're tending to see salt build up over time where there's tunnels. So that's just something to consider depending on the type of tunnel that you have.
What about antibiotic buildup?
Yeah, I can't really speak to that.
I don't know either. I'm not sure that those, do they last through composting?
I don't
There's
know.
some studies. I don't think it's been well researched enough, actually.
You said a big truck came by. You said when high chicken litter, it'll suppress.
Mycorrhizal development. A lot of plants depend on mycorrhiza as a way to help in the uptake of nutrients from the soil. And with high chicken litter tend to be high in phosphorus, and then with high phosphorus levels, you suppress mycorrhizal development in the soil.
When you said mycorrhiza, that brought mushroom compost to mind. I know there's a place somewhere around can get mushroom compost. How's that stacking up?
That mushroom compost is not certified organic, so if you are an organic producer, that's something you want to keep in mind. They do add urea to that, so it's not organic, but
Is there organic mushroom compost? That you can,
not
that
at
you can-
not at Monterey Mushroom.
not at Monterey, but elsewhere in the country. You can. It's,
I would guess
Probably,
that there
but it's
is.
a volume. I mean,
Yeah.
how you gonna get it?
Yeah.
Uh,
And then
Initially,
getting it here and all that good stuff.
salt levels are really a heavy metal. We're a real concern. Has that been resolved?
with mushroom.
Yeah, that hasn't been a problem for that compost. It's just the additives that they're putting into it in Monterey.
Chicken litter, now
Yeah.
it comes from organic to these folks.
No.
There's not a stipulation on where your manure comes from in organic production, so that's also another consideration if you're using cow manure, because there's a class of herbicides that's been used more frequently in recent years, the clopyralids, and those compounds go right through the cow, and so if you're putting them on your vegetable production fields after a pasture's been sprayed with clopyralid herbicides, they can damage your plants or kill your plants. So if you're not using your own cow manure, you want to make sure you know what's been applied to the pasture that those cows might have been grazing on, because that's an important consideration.
Is it a volume question when it comes to like organic chicken poultry litter? Is it just an access or?
Well, for me, it's price, volume, transportation, all those types of things.
Yeah, our soil
Yeah.
specialist argues that chicken litter is the best option for folks because we do have a lot of chicken operations in Tennessee. So as far as sustainability goes, we have the volume. It's not a large transportation issue as it would be with some other sources. So I mean, it's how
The
you-
chicken-
Cause trouble with it.
The chicken litter is generally 4.2 to 4.9% nitrogen, so you know that's 49 pounds per thousand. A ton of chicken litter is 100 pounds of nitrogen, let's say. So you know, a lot of the conventional guys, the grain guys, the corn guys, are driving up the price of chicken litter because they're using it versus traditional fertilizers for those, and which is bad for me, but I guess it's it's good that they're using that. But they're putting about 2 to 4 tons per acre, so they're putting 200 to 400 pounds of nitrogen, let's say, to grow corn. So
Now, if you have your own chicken,
yeah. Well,
You still have to leave it out to cure some of it before you put it.
yeah, you're talking. I mean, the litter I'm talking about. You may or may not want to know this. Maybe you do. They're raising about 6 batches of chickens on this one thing of litter, and so it's not anything recognizable in there. It's not like chicken poop, right? If you're raising chickens, you're scooping up chicken poop, I would assume, and yeah, you don't want to put that. Yeah, and so I would compost that material before I put it out in the field. That's all.
But that brings up some of the questions. First off, we did have a grower in East Tennessee that was trying to grow peaches organically and was concerned with using organic chicken litter. He found some up in the Northeast. Well, you can imagine what the trucking charges are. So it's going to be very almost prohibitive from that standpoint. Secondly, it's important to realize that, and you mentioned it too, with the nutrient content of different litters is going to be tremendously variable. So it's hard to really be precise on your application. And then depending on what type of litter it is, it's a slow release. And some of the information will tell you, like with chicken litter, that perhaps 90% of the N on that will be available the year of application and 10% will carry over. Other people will say it's not that high, but then other types of manures or litters will be less than that, to the point that maybe 50 or 60% will be available the year of application, and you'll get carryover of up to close to half, which, while it may not be a problem, is definitely something you've got to be aware of when you start to look at your fertilization regime so that you don't overdo it.
Does that do anything to improve the soil structure?
It does. It does help to improve soil structure. That's the other good thing about it. Any more questions?
You produce any sweet corn?
We produce a little for the markets. It's a problem. Dipel, spray Dipel frequently, and hope they don't come in. Yeah, it's a problem.
Are there any other questions, areas that Hank mentioned earlier too, when we were over actually in the other field about spraying and the ability or the necessity to get coverage. And definitely in many cases the success or failure of a pesticide application, regardless of whether it's organically approved or conventional, is going to be a matter of timing, rates, and good application procedures. And with it's important to have a sprayer that's going to give you total coverage on a lot of these materials. If you have something that's not systemic, you've got to place the material where you need it. And that's the only way it's going to get there. So timely application, right rates, and proper application procedures are every bit as important as what you use.
I would like to say, anybody wants some strawberries? Here's a quart. Pick your own. So.
Hey, they only get one quart now.
One quart.
Don't grab up whole fish full of quart now.
And whatever you can eat too. I don't, whatever.
Well, we won't worry about eating it.
Well, thank you very much to the Delvins for having us.
Yes.